We hope you've had a chance to see the display upstairs. Its title is... Oh, should we put on the video? Yeah. Okay. So the title... okay. You can silence it. It's silent. Sorry? So you can maybe silence this. Yeah? Right, so we hope you've had the chance to check out the display upstairs. Its title is Researchers Display, and it's made up of books, news clippings, photocopies, and printouts, all connected with handwritten notes exploring and mapping out particular themes about the arts in Cyprus. Particular themes through documentation about the arts in Cyprus. This is the second such display we've produced, and it was done specifically for this conference. And the images behind me are, they were taken during the previous version, which took place in Nicosia a little over a year ago. The aim of this presentation is to relate the display upstairs with some of the issues discussed in this conference and to contextualize it as the product of a particular type of experiment. A practical, investigative and historiographical experiment, an experiment in collaboration, an experiment arguably that raises questions about history writing and its process, and an experiment about the presentation of historical knowledge or the presentation of something as a history or a story, something implicit in most kinds of display, in museological and curatorial work especially. Is this noise okay?
No.
Should I just turn this off and just stop?
Try.
Do they need to show something? Because the balance is created by the object.
Maybe you can try the water.
No.
Is this okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. The domination of military history was mentioned yesterday at some point, as well as its relationship with the political, in a very particular sense, by Yannis Papadakis. And from our perspective, not only is art history and cultural history not distinct or secondary to these things, but on the contrary. In the first instance, our work has dealt with the power of storytelling with regard to how exhibition making and art writing came in at certain key moments crucial to the development of certain cultures of memory and narratives of identity, nation, and culture. And in the particular iteration presented above, or upstairs, we begin to set up a framework to investigate the role of the arts in setting up dominant ethno-national narratives of division, even as what we set out to do was to make new connections and discover points of continuity. To introduce the team, the first thing to note is that it's made up of 5 Cypriot women, Evanthia, Tselika, whose research focuses on conflict transformation in art. And this has been developed through a practice-based research process which addresses the role of socially engaged art in segregated urban contexts, focusing on Nicosia, Cyprus. Elena Barba, who couldn't be with us today, who has been working on how the notion of landscape resurfaces in the work of contemporary Cypriot artists when they negotiate the Cyprus conflict and its repercussions on identity and memory. Christina Lambrou, whose research focuses on exploring the complex relations between nationalism and colonialism in 20th century artistic practice outside of the Western canon, through examining the cultural production of Adamantios Diamandis, vis-à-vis the process of modernization in Cypriot society and modernism in art. Then Maria Petrides, an independent writer and translator who works closely with artists and is currently researching images of war in contemporary documentary photography and the role of museums in engaging audiences. And myself, Chrystalleni Loizidou. And my research uses commemorative and public artworks to delve into questions around spatial politics, memory and its institutionalization, as well as political communication at key historical moments in Cyprus. So we all 5 of us deal with distinct fields, and we have different kinds of focus, but we all deal with issues around history and memory. And at this point, we should also thank Heidi Trautmann, an art historian working in the north of Cyprus, and Loizidou of the European Mediterranean Art Association, who provided us with extra material for the display. And also Chrystalleni, who we met yesterday, and who's also helping us with multiple material. So, to tell you how this project came up, because of our respective specializations, we have each been compiling historical and documentary information on exhibitions and developments in the visual arts in Cyprus. On the one hand, this is a markedly understudied field. It is also easy to say that it is characterized by anything but fluidity, inclusivity, openness, and interdisciplinarity, and this is one of the things that we're responding to, or one might say gleefully resisting through this kind of work. And at the same time, it is clear to us that the material we have each been compiling amounts to more than we could do justice to through solitary study. In terms of its complexity, of its quantity, and also arguably because of its political urgency. So our way of dealing with this is to share this material and open it up in order to allow further contributions, cross-referencing and additional processing by a community. And to give you a little bit of the history of this, we began working together a year ago when some of us were invited to co-curate an exhibition at the Nicosia Municipal Arts Center, a controversial local institution, both in its dominance of the local cultural scene and curatorial work, and its relationship with the international art scene that was at that time attempting a paradigm shift in its operations. So we felt that this was time for us to reflect on Cypriot institutional history in the arts and culture, and to start discussing these things more critically. So what brought us together, in a sense, was the need to place our own condition as researchers and cultural producers within a type of institutional history that no longer denied its politics or was blind to its exclusions, gaps, and divisions. Another thing that brought us together was the need to very quickly create the ground we needed in order to jump ahead to what we really wanted to do. To move beyond our historical narratives that fall into a dominant Hellenocentric approach, not just in relation to Cypriot history, but also in an international sense in terms of the history and definition of Western culture. And also to move beyond the prevalent and problematic historicization of the arts in Cyprus in terms of generations of returning artists from art schools abroad. So we began by constructing a timeline, using dates to map the opening and closing of art spaces and art publications, shifts and repetitions and thematic concerns, in the development of a curatorial culture, the development of relationships with international art events, and so on. These served as the basis for a whole lot of conversations between us and in public events with others, which we documented and included in the display. The timeline continued to evolve through specialized workshops, discussions, presentations, and digitization of material. So, we should also note that this included events held as part of the Curatorial Practices Reframed conference, which was held at the European University of Cyprus a year ago, where we took the opportunity to present our work to curators and art historians from all over the world and incorporate their feedback. So in that particular occasion, we looked into the way the project can be seen to turn into itself, addressing the history of exhibition making through an exhibition format and inviting reflection on its own historiographic and curatorial methods. So during that first manifestation, while working and collecting material around the visual arts, we realized that there were many gaps, and actually this was pointed out to us repeatedly. There were missing dates, experiences from which we were disconnected, and also because we had little access to archives in the north. Not necessarily in order to fill in these gaps. That's not our impulse. But the point of what we're trying to do, especially in this iteration, is to begin to understand our disconnection or these disconnections. So we organized for the timeline to host a presentation by Amber Onar on the Untitled History Project in 2008, which was coordinated by Cyprus fellow Rana Zincir. This was a one-year research initiative into the forces of shaping the plastic arts scene of North Cyprus over a period of 26 years. And it was an opportunity to view a comprehensive assessment of developments in the plastic arts during that time. So in this case, for this conference on historical culture or historical cultures, within this second iteration of the timeline, we moved away from the timeline format to focus on particular themes that connect the North and South, whatever this may mean in different cases. We focused on reconfiguring and adding a new layer to the previously collected data, attempting new conversations about developments in the arts in the North and South of Cyprus in the 20th century. We also continue to investigate the opening up of the collaborative research process as a subject of presentation and exhibition in itself. And we're trying to process questions about art writing in Cyprus born out of different kinds of separations and mutual exclusions. And of course, we see this as an opportunity to push our thinking forward with your help. For this occasion, we sought to find individual collaborators that would help us tackle archives in the North, a search that continues, and please consider it a call for you to come in and help us. A call that is loaded with concerns around the structure of bicameral programs in Cyprus and their role and their limitations, which is actually one of the themes the display begins to track upstairs. And although we haven't yet found collaborators willing to come in with us into these research marathons that we hold, we did go to the North and talk to Heidi Troutman using the interview as a technique, and Eddie will talk about this more in a bit. We also gathered material from Emma and continued and we plan to continue by approaching the Center of Cyprus Studies at the Eastern Mediterranean University in Famagusta. So throughout the various conversations we've been having in the course of the previous year, we've always been reluctant to compromise this effort through a clear heading or title or label, arguably by stating that what this project is not, in our title, the title being "This is not History Writing Volume 2. So by stating what this project is not, we are already giving the direction. Yet what this direction is, and by effect it is not, remains a year after the project's inception, under constant negotiation between us and the challenges we face as art historians, writers and researchers in Cyprus. So I'll pass you on, Emily.
Hello, is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so hello from me as well. So taking on from where Chrystalleni left off, so this project and its title, This is Not History Writing, it's meant to be less of an aphorism and more of an affirmative decision, not to profess to do something vaster than implied. The idea of a timeline assumes historical or chronicle linearity, and this in itself raises problematic issues of authority, authorship, contextual analysis, historicism, and narrative schooling. Aware of this, as collaborators, we worked within loose parameters of what looks like an attempt to record, to some extent, a history of exhibition making in Cyprus, but which in fact is an accessible effort to include diverse fields of critical play by bringing teamwork to the forefront of this ongoing project. So these two efforts are a kind of practice research which articulates a knowledge that dawdles between historical gaps, unfulfilled moments in history, a practice that raises a critical platform made up of varying voices and creative professionals who look back to a history of exhibition making, not only to reflect on what has failed to be, or to archive in an orderly way what exhibition making has achieved, but to consider alternative methods and tools, approaches and questions which move collaboration ahead for new ways of doing. The good way, the academic way, would be to research, write, publish, and then meet with peers and discuss conclusions in conferences. It seems that in the context of these projects, we have reversed the order of things. It proved much more fruitful and inspiring to meet first, exchange ideas, discuss observations, not by way of definite conclusions, but as points in a process that remains open-ended, unfinished, and ongoing. The difficulties of access and what that implies in places where status quo remains intact became quite apparent early on in their endeavor. Through divided narratives of North and South, we realized how much of what we were trying to do involved engaging critical methodologies which crossed boundaries of gender, class, disciplines, and other equally important ethnic and migrant minorities in Cyprus. Collaborative research as a visual process displayed openly to readings, suggestions, interventions, and objections highlights practices of exploration without a concrete end product in mind. Collaboration and process are words that for some time now have been used in the vocabulary of contemporary artistic practices, state and international funding processes, and corporate and commercial language. Collaboration in itself is a complex notion and can be understood through multiple facets of interpretation. By addressing this notion of collaboration, we would like to draw attention as to how the process of working together with other people can create a sense of community. Through the process of this particular group working together and the dialogues and exchanges that this facilitated, the need to be inclusive rather than exclusive arose, to create further layers of interpretation, encounters, context, dialogues, which bring different people together. So bringing in art professionals, non-professional publics, incorporating the reflection of different generations, and insisting on bringing in the voices of multiple communities to the best of our abilities that reside on the island, can assist in cultivating an intercollective dialogical format that could help us to reflect on how the visual arts have been perceived, conceived, exhibited, taught, and historicized in Cyprus in the last 100 or so years. Working together in the field of the arts is by no means a new construction. It has a complex and long history that comprises different forms and hierarchies regarding how artistic production is organized and executed. Collaboration, as a process of working together, is interpreted as being a useful strategy in enabling the building of relationships through hands-on contact and group effort. And this element of creating together particularly shapes both the process and the product. Peace-building art programs, in fact, often make their main focus the process of working together and collaborating to produce an end result. The contact that this process enables allows for relationships to be built, relationships that start really from below, from the collaborators themselves, and cannot really be imposed on the long term from above. So we will now continue by briefly outlining some of the themes that stood out for us while working on the display upstairs. So as this is an experiment in openness and the sharing of research and ideas, instead of trying to things in terms of divisions, we try to identify and track continuities and highlight certain thematics that have been jumping out to us. Now, as we said earlier, Chrystalleni said, we tried to address what was happening in the north, because as we're all Greek Cypriots and we're very aware of that, like how to see that parallel. So in our efforts, opening this up, Heidi Trapman, who's an art historian and an artist, who's German-born. She researches issues on the development of the plastic arts in North Cyprus, and she responded to our call. And we went and interviewed her in her home, and she has been collecting information and writing about arts in Northern Cyprus since 1999, when she started living here. And she's gonna tell you herself through the video, because she couldn't be here. Due to health.
Do we need this to
Do you have to have sound?
Yes.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Make it loud.
Sound is off.
The sound is off.
It should be like from yours. There is enough?
Sorry? Do you try this?
The art scene in North Cyprus started with a handful of artists that had, for the first time, the occasion to study art in Turkey, most probably. Turkey had gone through a development through Atatürk, who was leaning towards the West, also in the arts, in literature and everything. And he sent young artists to the West, to Paris, to study there. And they came back and took over the teaching, the education, the art education of the next generation. And so the young people from Cyprus, they went to Turkey, and if they had the money, the parents had the money, they were even sent further, or they were supported by other means, by the governmental means or whatever education department they were sent at. It started, I would say, in the 60s. The first Turkish Cypriot artist in the Western style was Bilgün Güney's father, İsmet Güney, who one day created the Cypriot flag, and he had studied on the basis of the books he had. He had a lot of books, and he was studying them, and he did, in his holidays, he was a teacher, and his holidays he went to Turkey, and while he was in military service in Egypt, he had some academic lessons. And he came back, and he was the first art teacher in Turkish Cyprus, and also he was had the first exhibition in Cyprus. The art scene in North Cyprus started with a handful of artists that...
Okay, so our second thread that we identified through this process that we did, was peace building and the use of the arts in this process. So it is very important to note that collaborative methodologies are actually very prominent in contemporary peace building art initiatives. And a key element of art as a tool for peace building is actually its ability to build relationships through shared action, and that it acts as a language of its own. In Cyprus, art has been used to assist the process of people imagining themselves as opposing ethno-national communities, and in recent years it has claimed to promote relationship building in conflict resolution efforts. Peace-building art initiatives vary widely, from small-scale art projects for young people to artist collaborations. However, building relationships and restoring, developing trust, empathy, and social bonds is a process that requires long-term, consistent, face-to-face interaction. While it is true that such practices can instigate contact and relationship building, it is important to also consider who is being brought into contact, how, why, and by whom. A third theme that is partly visible in the display concerns the recent development of art-related writing in Cyprus in a broader sense, from arts criticism in the press to exhibition catalogues and more recently dedicated publications that attempt to map aspects of the local art scene for international consumption. So one of the things that can be extracted from the display on the wall today is that art history in Cyprus is a nascent field. It has been largely defined by the will to do history writing and to provide thus historical reinforcement and depth to what was understood to be under threat, the island's opposed Greekness and Turkishness. And speaking specifically of the narratives constructed by Greek and Greek Cypriot art historians in the 80s and 90s, these are marked by absences, exclusions, and gaps, as well as what today seem rather unhelpful categorizations and disciplinary bounds. Prior to the partial opening of the checkpoints in 2003, the history of the contemporary art in the Cypriot south of the border carried the traces of the island's territorial and ethnic division. However, since the 1990s, and I would say the late 80s, we have witnessed conscious efforts to cover distances and bridge gaps through publications and art exhibitions, and mostly just collaborative art endeavors. However, it still remains unclear where we stand in the moment, and we seem to try to figure out how a local context of a divided society has shaped the historical culture of contemporary Cypriot visual art in North and South. And we'd just like to finish, that the best way to conclude, we thought, is to set out a series of questions which we've been asking ourselves, even though they may not be every researcher's or historian's cup of tea. So here they are. Does display as a practice allow other kinds of readings that would not be possible if we had chosen another path? What does this do to formal ideas of history writing? How can we make our manifestations, displays, discursive and inclusive? What processes of reflection are necessary to gain access to this type of material? How do we overcome the authority of institutional spaces and the limits of what we make visible? How do we interpret the material available? How do we deal with issues of archival access and organization in relation to the institutionalization of the conflict both north and south? How can collaboration be a research tool in the current multicultural reality of Cyprus? And how can it assist in further understanding that in fact Cyprus was never just a bicultural national environment? How do we challenge prospective and prescribed research practices in a place which has become branded through its ethno-national division, exploited to the extent it has become a tourist attraction, like in other previously divided cities, i.e. Berlin, Checkpoint, Charlie? Thank you very much from all of us.